Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Monday everybody. Let's begin with Taiwan. Last week, from Thursday through Sunday, yesterday, the People's Liberation Army engaged in a series of unprecedented military exercises in several regions hugging Taiwan. On Sunday evening, the People's Liberation Army said that 66 jets had been trained for an, quote, island attack campaign, end quote, that is, a simulated attack on Taiwan. In the previous days, PLA fighter jets, ballistic missiles, drones and Navy assets engaged in the largest PRC exercises against Taiwan in modern history. We remember that on Thursday, the PLA's rocket force fired missiles that travelled over Taipei itself, with 5 missiles even landing in Japan's exclusive economic zone. The unprecedented 4-day exercises, a response to US lawmaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taipei last week, were partly a warning to the world regarding a so-called red line for Beijing, but also partly a face-saving exercise for a domestic audience. We remember, after all, that weeks of escalating threats, including a personal warning from Xi Jinping to Joe Biden over the phone, failed to deter Pelosi's visit. Statements from officials and in state media have been muscular in tone and have attempted to project a sense of strength, at least domestically. Quote, "Our firepower covers all of Taiwan, and we can strike wherever we want. We got really close to Taiwan. We encircled Taiwan. And we demonstrated that we can effectively stop intervention by foreign forces." End quote. Of course, Beijing is also seeking to send a clear message to the people of Taiwan, and Taiwanese officials are concerned that Beijing is attempting to establish a new status quo around the island. The Taiwan Strait is a key route for supply chains, not just in the region but internationally, with almost half of global container ships passing through the waterway each year. While vessels are continuing to travel through the strait during these military exercises, they are navigating around the drill zones, and in terms of aircraft, only a handful of flights have been cancelled. However, blockade concerns remain. Quote, "This is a pre-blockade demonstration, as a full blockade would include threats to shoot down airliners and the mining of ports by submarines and the development of air-naval forces in a full circle around Taiwan. It is the first opportunity for the PLA to prove to itself and to Taiwan that it can conduct large joint air, naval, missile and space operations necessary to impose a full blockade." End quote. Fisher also advises that the US should undertake a massive airlift of weapons to Taiwan to build up war stocks before a full Chinese blockade is attempted. However, other analysts argue that such a move would be too destabilizing and risks unnecessary escalation. On Sunday, the Taiwanese Defense Ministry announced that units operating its domestically developed anti-ship missiles had been put on high alert and were monitoring Chinese warships. While the official 4 days of PLA live fire exercises are now over, analysts warn that more may well be on the way. Indeed, just today, Monday local time, the PLA announced fresh military drills in the seas and airspace around Taiwan, with the Eastern Theater Command saying that it would conduct joint drills focusing on anti-submarine and sea assault operations. So this is certainly not over. We will continue following relevant developments in the coming weeks and, if necessary, coming months. Next up, the international conversation about the Taiwan crisis in recent days in a way touches on a theme which we have been following coming out of Beijing for some time now, an ongoing public opinion war between the PRC and the West has been a popular idea pushed by Beijing in recent years, coming to prominence especially during the Hong Kong protests and in the beginning months of the pandemic. Then, last year, General Secretary Xi Jinping at a Politburo meeting called for more to be done to develop its own, quote, discourse and narrative power, End quote. Well, last week the party's top ideology journal, 九事, or Seeking Truth, published a special piece discussing how state media is fighting its so-called narrative battle or public opinion war, giving the example of state-run television group CCTV, which, according to the journal, quote, dares to fight, excels in speaking out, and uses offense as a means of defense to break through the long-term monopoly of Western media on public opinion. End quote. The journal article then gives examples of how outlets like CCTV and CGTN, both state-run organizations, have, quote, challenged and debunked Western narratives, end quote, including in conversations about the origins of the COVID-19 virus, the Capitol riots in Washington, D.C., the war in Ukraine, and other events. Now, we have observed indigenous narratives from state media in response to these and other events. However, some of the state media's more successful narratives are not indigenous to China at all, but rather have been adopted or adapted from contrarian thinkers from within the West itself, speaking on Western media platforms. Thus, what is deeply ironic is that this diversity and dynamism within the wider Western media landscape, from which state media in China has selected useful narratives from, is one of the very qualities that gives it much more soft power than the Chinese state media landscape. Another awkward claim which we have observed from Beijing's discussion of the so-called public opinion war is that narratives inconvenient to Beijing from non-Western regions, like outlets in Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong, or India, etc., are also argued to be part of Western narratives with which China is also in competition with. The 九事 article concludes by stating just how well China has been doing in this ongoing public opinion war. Quote, CCTV has effectively engaged in international public opinion struggles, continued to enhance overseas delivery capabilities, strive to break the hegemony of Western discourse, and focused on building a fair, objective, positive, and healthy global public opinion ecosystem. End quote. Okay, now let's end with a few updates on the Chinese economy. According to a recent report by Baike Research Institute, major Chinese cities are seeing climbing vacancy rates, yet another sign of excessive housing supply in the market, even in wealthier regions. According to the report, average housing vacancy rates in China's 28 major cities reached 12%, higher than the average rate in the United States, Canada, France, Australia, and Britain, and this vacancy rate is likely to rise further. Chinese financial media, though not surprised, covered the report's warnings over the weekend. Quote, a low housing vacancy rate is usually an indicator of greater room for property market growth. A reasonable rate should lie between 5% and 10%. When the expectation of a decline in housing prices is strong, a large number of vacant houses may enter the market and lead to a surge in supply in the short term, aggravating the imbalance between supply and demand and further pushing down prices. End quote. Next up is another report, this one from the Institute of International Finance, IIF, which finds that foreign investors continue to cut holdings in China's $20 trillion bond market in July, with Chinese equities also being dumped for the first time in several months. However, China was not alone. Emerging markets also saw portfolio outflows across the board in July. The IIF estimates that Chinese bonds saw about $3 billion of outflows last month, and if this is accurate, it would be the sixth consecutive month of bond outflows. The stock market saw $3.5 billion of foreign outflows in July too. The report warned that this bumpy road may not be over either, writing, quote, for the coming months, several factors will influence flows dynamics. Among these, the timing of inflation peaking and the outlook for the Chinese economy will be in focus. End quote. And as we know, the outlook for the Chinese economy is still very much up in the air. And finally, for the Chinese economy and for today's video, China's answer to Hawaii, the beach resort city of Sanya in Hainan province, has been placed under lockdown due to an outbreak of the contagious Omicron subvariant BA.5, stranding more than 80,000 Chinese tourists from across the country, but also cutting the tourist city off from the national market at the height of the tourism season. In July 2021, for example, the city hosted 2.7 million inbound tourists. With the lockdown, hundreds of daily flights have been cancelled, choking the city of a key source of revenue. Indeed, according to local government numbers, last year tourism accounted for nearly 90% of Sanya's GDP. Well, this is going to be a very painful hit to Sanya's economy, hurting businesses and households. What is especially concerning about this outbreak for officials is that as a tourist location, the risk of spread to a diversity of different regions is very high. Indeed, the locally detected virus has already spread to 8 other cities and counties in Hainan itself, as well as 2 other provinces in southern China. Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, and for anyone who wants to go the extra mile and help me continue making these videos every day, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you everybody for watching and for the ongoing support. I'll see you tomorrow.